On February 1st, 2012, a man walked onto a stage in Midtown Manhattan and told the country that American retailers had been getting it wrong for 100 years. His name was Ron Johnson. He'd just left Apple, where he'd built the most profitable retail stores per square foot in the history of the planet. And now he intended to do the same thing for JCPenney. So, on that morning in New York, in front of investors and reporters, he announced he was going to do it by getting rid of coupons. No more sales, no more 40% off stickers, just honest, everyday prices. He called it fair and square and smiled when he said it. 8 weeks later, JCPenney's same-store sales fell off a cliff. A year later, the company would lose nearly $1 billion, and Johnson would be gone. This week on the show, what did that hour on stage actually cost? Why the bill for a bad customer experience never arrives in one piece? And how a pizza company drowning in cardboard jokes did the one thing Ron Johnson refused to do. That's all coming up after the break on Marginally Better.
From the global headquarters of Johnson Taylor in beautiful New Jersey, it's Marginally Better. Here's your host, Joe Taylor Jr.
When we talk about bad customer experience, the conversation usually drifts toward stories. The angry tweet, the viral video, a friend who says they will never shop at that place again. Those stories are real, but they're not where the money is hiding. The money is hiding somewhere in a spreadsheet. You see, every year since 2016, the research firm Forrester has measured how American consumers feel about hundreds of major brands. They call it the Customer Experience Index. For most of the index's history, the news was unremarkable. A few brands would go up, a few would go down, but the average would more or less stay flat. And then 2024 happened. In their June 2024 report, Forrester analysts wrote that the index hit its lowest point in nearly a decade, and 39% of brands tracked saw their CX score decline year over year. Only 9% improved. Senior analyst Rick Parrish told Fast Company that what they were watching was a slow leak, customers giving up on companies one disappointment at a time. Now, this isn't a story about one bad year. It's a story about the bill arriving for a decade of choices. Cheaper customer service, slower email replies, chatbots in front of humans, websites built for the company and not the customer. Each of those decisions saved money on a quarterly report, but then, eventually, all of them showed up on the same balance sheet. In May of 2024, the audio company Sonos pushed out a redesigned app. Sonos makes those wireless speakers. The app is how you control them. And the new version was, by the company's own later admission, not finished. Features that customers had relied on for years were just gone. Speakers stopped responding to commands. Reviews on the App Store collapsed all the way down to 1 star. Reddit lit up with people unable to play music in their own homes. According to The Verge and Bloomberg, Sonos disclosed that fixing the app would cost between $20 and $30 million in direct expense. The company also delayed 2 new product launches because the app couldn't support them. Holiday sales suffered, and by January of 2025, CEO Patrick Spence had stepped down. Nobody at Sonos set out to break their own product. The app shipped because somebody somewhere in that organization decided it was ready. And the cost of being wrong about that, measured in revenue, in market value, in a CEO's job, was almost certainly more than the cost of a few more weeks of testing. Now, if you'd like a number that explains why so many companies are bleeding without realizing it, here's one. The Baymart Institute, which has been tracking online shopping behavior for over a decade, reports that the average e-commerce cart abandonment rate sits at right about 70%. 7 out of 10 people who put something in a digital cart never finish buying it. Some of that is window shopping, but Baymard's research, which is built on usability testing rather than survey data, finds that the leading reasons are often fixable. Surprise costs at checkout, accounts required when a guest checkout would do, slow load times, confusing forms. None of those problems require a new business model. They just require somebody whose job it is to notice. And that somebody on most websites sometimes doesn't exist. So here's what these three stories have in common. The Forrester report tells us the experience is getting worse. The Sonos story tells us how fast a small mistake can compound. And the Baymard number tells us that most of the bleeding happens quietly on a checkout page without anyone setting off an alarm. So when we come back, I'll tell you the story of a man who walked into one of America's oldest department stores believing that he understood the customer better than the customer did, and what it cost to find out, for maybe the only time in his career to date, that he was wrong. That's after the break on Marginally Better. If you're a business owner, I need to tell you something that might sting. Your beautiful website is probably costing you thousands in lost revenue. The Nielsen Norman Group found that 76% of professional websites, sites with million-dollar budgets, perform mediocre to poor on conversion. And if you built your site on Squarespace, Wix, or GoDaddy, your conversion rate is probably half of what it should be. Research shows the average business website can improve conversions by 35% or more just by fixing a few basic problems. I'm launching a new podcast called Website Reality Check. 10 episodes, each one walking you through research-backed fixes you can implement yourself, even on DIY platforms. Get free access to the first episode at websiterealitycheck.com. Stop leaving money on the table with websites that look great but don't convert. That's websiterealitycheck.com. It's Marginally Better. I'm Joe Taylor Jr. In the summer of 2011, the board of JCPenney was looking for a savior. The company was 109 years old. It had outlived 2 world wars and a depression. But by 2011, JCPenney was, by every meaningful measure, slowly drowning. Same-store sales had been flat or declining for years. The stores felt tired. The customer base was aging. Younger shoppers walked right past the doors at the mall on the way to somewhere else. Bill Ackman, the activist investor whose hedge fund Pershing Square had just taken a major stake in a company, had a name in mind for its rescue: Ron Johnson. Johnson was a retail superstar. He had spent 15 years at Target, where he helped invent the idea that a discount store could feel more like a designer boutique. And then in 2000, Steve Jobs hired him to figure out what an Apple store could be. So by 2011, the answer to that question was $3,800 in sales per square foot, the highest of any retailer in the United States. Now, disclosure time. For a few of those years in the late aughts, Ron was my boss's boss's boss. I was part of Apple during a time when it had a notoriously flat org chart. We loved working for that guy. He could embrace getting a little cheesy during our all-hands presentations, and he wasn't afraid to roll back an idea that wasn't quite landing right. So when Steve Jobs disclosed that his health issues were going to force him to step away from the business, many of the top-level leaders at Apple decided they wanted to go make their own dents in the universe outside of Apple, just like Steve taught us. So the pitch wrote itself. Take a man who'd reinvented Target, then reinvented tech retail, and let him reinvent JCPenney. Johnson was named CEO in June 2011. He brought a bunch of our former Apple colleagues over there with him, and he started in November. And he had, by his own count, exactly 100 days to tell the world exactly what he was going to do. So on February 1st, 2012, Ron stood on a stage in Manhattan in front of investors, journalists, and his own employees, and he unveiled a strategy he called Fair and Square. According to coverage at the time in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, the plan was bold in a way that retail rarely is. Johnson would eliminate nearly all of JCPenney's roughly 500 annual sales events. He'd get rid of the high-low pricing model the chain had used for decades, the model where everything has an inflated sticker price and then a coupon brings it back down to what people will actually want to pay. And in its place, 3 tiers: everyday low prices, month-long values on selected items, and best prices, the clearance rack, but renamed. No coupons, no more flyers, no 40% off. Just honest, simplified pricing all the time. On stage, Johnson explained why he thought this would work. Coupons, he said, were insulting. Sales events trained customers to wait until something was on sale. Real value shouldn't need a red tag. He also said, on the record, that JCPenney would not test these changes before rolling them out chain-wide. He told an audience at a Goldman Sachs conference that we didn't test at Apple. Now, in Cupertino, that sentence had been a flex. Now, at Apple Retail, change either iterated from the stores up. Someone in the field would figure out an interesting solution to a problem, and that would bubble up until it became a global policy. Or HQ would come up with an idea, then they'd roll out a top-down transformation of a service, a feature, or a staffing approach. Now, let's take another look at that sentence. We didn't test at Apple. In reality, we tested a lot at Apple. There was a whole sound stage with a mock store inside of it. It was meant to simulate what would happen if we ever changed one of our product displays, or where team members would stand, or what happened if you adjusted the lights a little bit. Here's what I think Ron was really trying to say. With so much experience at the top of that flat org chart, few people argued when Ron wanted to experiment. Most of the things we did worked. The few that didn't could usually be rolled back or forgotten fairly easily. You see, this era was the pinnacle for Apple Retail's growth. Riding the wave of iPhone, iPad, and MacBook Air sales, opening new stores at record pace. We didn't test at Apple because we were just constantly trying to catch our breath. In Plano, Texas, where JCPenney was headquartered, we didn't test at Apple would turn out to be the most expensive sentence that anyone had ever said inside that building. The new pricing went live on February 1st. By the end of the first quarter, 3 months in, same-store sales were down nearly 19% year over year. Johnson's team assumed customers would learn the new system. They didn't. The Harvard Business School case study by Professor Joshua Margolis later documented what was actually happening. JCPenney's core customer wasn't shopping for the lowest possible price. They were shopping for the feeling of having found a deal. The coupon wasn't an insult. The coupon was fun. It was the point. When you removed the coupon, you didn't just remove a discount. You took away the dopamine hit. You took away the reason they came in the door in the first place. They did not show up on Saturday morning to buy a $40 pair of jeans for $40. They showed up to buy a $60 pair of jeans for $40. It's a completely different experience. Now, by the second quarter, Johnson's team started panicking. They added back some sale events. They reintroduced coupons under a new name. But the brand had spent a whole year telling customers that coupons were dead. And now the company was sending coupons again? Same-store sales for fiscal year 2012 came in down 25%. The company lost nearly $1 billion on the year. And the stock, which had been near $40 when Johnson was hired, was now trading in the teens. On April 8th, 2013, the JCPenney board fired Ron Johnson. He'd been CEO for 17 months. The board's solution was to bring back his predecessor, Mike Ullman. Ullman immediately reinstated coupons, brought back the sale events and the flyers. He rolled back the in-store boutiques, and he told employees the old playbook wasn't broken. It had just been ignored. But the damage was done. JCPenney never fully recovered the customers it lost in 2012. The company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in May of 2020, and the chain still exists, but in a smaller form under different ownership. The version of JCPenney that Bill Ackman thought could be the next Apple, that company's gone. So Here's the part of Ron's story that doesn't show up in the obituaries. Ron was not lazy. He was not underprepared. He remains one of the smartest guys ever to have worked in American retail. And he had spent his entire career studying retail. He was, at the moment of his hiring, probably the most accomplished merchant alive. The thing that took JCPenney down wasn't ignorance, it was certainty. Because Ron believed that he knew, before any data could tell him otherwise, exactly what the JCPenney customer wanted. He believed coupons were beneath them. He believed clean storefronts and Apple-style boutiques would speak louder than red sale tags. He believed all of this so completely that he refused to test it out on a single store before rolling it out across 1,100 locations. The cost of that certainty is now part of business school curriculum. $1 billion in losses and 40,000 jobs that eventually were lost when the company went bankrupt. What Forrester is measuring in slow motion across hundreds of brands, it's executives who are sure they know what their customers want, making decisions that nobody bothered to test, and then watching the bill arrive in pieces over the next few quarters. The question I'll leave you with is the one Ron Johnson didn't ask. How much of what you believe about your customer is really true? Is this something you've measured? And how much of it is something you've assumed? After the break, an admission that could get me kicked out of New Jersey. It's marginally better. You know what drives me crazy? Beautiful websites that don't actually work. I'm Joe Taylor Jr. I see this all the time in my work at our user experience agency, Johnson Taylor. Here's what I've learned after more than 20 years of building websites. Most organizations approach this backwards. They jump straight into pretty mock-ups or use DIY site builders without understanding what their site actually needs to accomplish. That's why my team and I start with strategy, not just aesthetics. We've cracked the code on building websites that are both beautiful and functional. And right now, we're offering complimentary website and user experience assessments for business podcast listeners. No sales pitch, just honest feedback about what's working on your site and what isn't. If you're tired of a website that looks good but doesn't deliver results, visit makethewebsiteworkforme.com. Discover what your website could really accomplish. makethewebsiteworkforme.com. It's Marginally Better. I'm Joe Taylor Jr. In December of 2009, a different CEO of a different iconic American company stood in front of a different camera and said something almost no one in his job has ever said out loud. His name was Patrick Doyle. He'd just been named CEO of Domino's Pizza. And in a 4-minute commercial that the company released to the public, he said this on camera: "Our pizza tastes like cardboard." Now, not in those exact words, but close enough. The ad, which was the centerpiece of a campaign Domino's called The Pizza Turnaround, showed real customers in focus groups saying real things. The worst excuse for pizza I've ever had. The crust tastes like cardboard. This is mass-produced. It's boring. And Doyle didn't argue, didn't defend it. He sat in the room. He took notes. Then he went back to his test kitchen. He scrapped the pizza recipe the company had used since 1960 and rebuilt it from scratch. New sauce, new cheese, new crust. And then he aired the commercial, the one with all the bad reviews in it. And this is a move that, on paper, probably should not have worked. Public companies do not, as a rule, broadcast their own customer hate mail. Marketing teams spend their lives keeping that footage out of the press. Doyle put it on national television and then had to buy the airtime himself. The reaction was not what anybody expected. According to the coverage in Bloomberg, an advertising age at the time, sales jumped 14% in the first quarter after that campaign launched. Same-store sales kept rising for the next 40 quarters. The stock went from under $9 in late 2009 to over $400 by the time Doyle stepped down in 2018. And according to S&P data, that is a return that beat Apple, Google, and Amazon over the same window. The interesting thing about the Domino's turnaround is not the new recipe. Plenty of companies change recipes. The interesting thing is what Doyle communicated by airing the bad reviews. He told customers in language they could not miss that he'd been listening. Not in a focus group, not in a survey that nobody reads, but listening in the way that hurts, to the part where people say your product is bad and they're not coming back. And I say this as a person who moved to New Jersey at least partially due to the proximity of some of the world's best fresh pizza. Domino's Pizza got good. There's an episode of a Netflix food documentary with Chef David Chang that examines the whole phenomenon and urges viewers to take Domino's for exactly what it is, not necessarily trying to replicate the best pizza that you can get anywhere in the world, but making a solid product available in a lot of communities that don't have access to a typical New York slice shop. And even here in New Jersey, in a lot of towns like mine, if you suddenly find yourself binging episodes of Line of Duty after midnight and you need a pizza delivered, they're your absolute best, if not only, option. Now, am I going to abandon my favorite neighborhood pizziola who retired to Sicily and then moved back to Jersey because he got bored? No way. But if I know I've only got a half-hour delivery window and I got a coupon in my digital wallet, I am absolutely firing up that Domino's pizza tracker. Now, Ron Johnson didn't want to run a single test on a single store at JCPenney. Patrick Doyle ran the Domino's focus group tape on national television. One of these guys was certain that he understood the customer. The other admitted that he didn't. So we went out and found out. The Forrester Index, the Sonos app, the 70% of carts that get abandoned, all of those are what happens when a company is running on expert founder logic. They have decided what the customer wants, and therefore no one on the team is bothering to check. The Domino's story is what happens when somebody finally checks. It is not, it turns out, the most expensive thing a company can do. It might end up being one of the cheapest. The true cost of bad customer experience is not a refund. It is the slow, quiet, year after year erosion of trust that doesn't show up on any single quarter's report until suddenly it shows up on all of them. And if you've been listening to this episode and thinking about your own website, your own checkout flow, your own product, here's the part where I'd usually pitch you something. So here it is. This is what I think you expect, but maybe a little softer than you're used to hearing elsewhere. A few times a year, my team and I sit down with a single page on a single website, and we audit it the way that Patrick Doyle's team audited that pizza recipe. No assumptions, no we already know, just what's actually happening here. What does this cost? And what is the smallest, cheapest thing that we can change to get a positive outcome for the customer? So this year, I decided to record an audio version of those audits, and I called it the Website Reality Check. It's at websiterealitycheck.com. There's a link to it in the show notes. And in honor of the CEO that brought coupons back to JCPenney, use the promo code MIKE, M-I-K-E, to take $20 off your purchase. That's at websiterealitycheck.com. Thanks for listening to Marginally Better. If something in this episode made you think differently, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It is the cheapest possible way that you can help us, and it genuinely helps the show find new listeners. For show notes, transcripts, and the full source list for tonight's episode, go to marginallybettershow.com. Marginally Better is a Califrax radio production. Our producer is Nicole Hubbard with research by Connie Evans. I'm Joe Taylor Jr.
Califrax, mean little planet.